Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We are beginning the 2045 to 2046 offseason. It was a relatively successful regular season for the Pirates. Won the NL Central for just the second time during this playthrough. We had finished fourth behind the Cardinals for 4 consecutive seasons. So although we had made the playoffs each of those years, the fact that we were able to get past not just the Cardinals, but the Brewers also this year to take the NL Central was a positive. We won a wild card series at home against the Cardinals in the first round of the playoffs. But then unfortunately we fell to the eventual world champion New York Mets in the division series 3-1. So from that perspective, not the most successful season, not the season that we wanted. We are now 8 years into this playthrough with the Pirates. You can see we've had 6 winning records, and we've actually made the playoffs in all of those 6 seasons when we had a winning record. So when I look at our overall record in this playthrough, which started off with 16 seasons in Kansas City, we made the playoffs 12 out of 16 times in Kansas City, which was a 75% playoff rate. And we've now made the playoffs 6 out of 8 times in Pittsburgh, which is also a 75% playoff rate. So both of those numbers are perfectly good and acceptable. The issue is that we won 5 championships in those 16 years in Kansas City. And here in Pittsburgh, we have not even made a World Series. So that is the big difference between the two playthroughs. The other big difference is our budget and our player payroll. We did get a small bump this past season to $154 million for next year, which will help. Right now, our player payroll is at $114 million. We're going to need to cut that. You can see it gives us a little bit of money for free agents and extensions right now, but that's only because we have pulled both of our scouting and development budgets down to bare bones type of levels. We did get a small boost in fan loyalty from pathetic to poor, and a 10-point boost in fan interest to 76 when we, towards the end of last episode, allowed Juan Bin Daoud, one of our promising young pitchers, to start a charity. Cost us $16 million, but did hopefully give us a bump to fan loyalty and fan interest that will persist for some time. So while we're thinking about it, we're tentatively going to boost our ticket prices to $18 for next season. You can see in the second half of the year when we were a very competitive team battling for a eventual division title, we did sell a good amount of tickets. So from that perspective, we should be able to increase ticket prices a bit for next year. The reason I am not going crazy, though, is that it is probably time to move on from a franchise icon. The level of budget that we have next year, $154 million, probably supports a payroll of in the neighborhood of $85 to $95 million to allow us to continue to invest pretty heavily in scouting and development, which we do want to do. And that does mean that Isaiah Hill has likely played his last game for the Pirates. This is a player who was drafted number 1 overall several years before we took the team over. So just fortunate that we had him in our system. And he was ready to come up in the second year of our playthrough in 2039. And you can see that he's now 30 years old. He's played 7 years in the majors. He is a 7-time All-Star, has won 4 Silver Sluggers. We'll find out whether he gets a 5th this offseason. Rookie of the Year, and a 2-time MVP, including during his rookie season when he joined Fred Lynn and Ichiro as the only players in baseball history to win an MVP award and Rookie of the Year in the same year. But as I said, he's now 30, and he's going to be making $29 million this coming season. and that number is only going to go higher. I feel like we've gotten the best value out of Hill. Obviously, he's had an exceptional career with over 300 home runs before he even turned 30 years old. The worst year of his season in terms of homers is 36. He's had 100 runs scored and 100 RBIs in all 7 years of his major league career. Just been a fantastic player, but he's coming off a career low WAR. He's going to be making more money than he's ever made. We did get his 3 minimum years, his 3 arbitration eligible years, the 6 years of team control we got, and then we did end up buying out his first year of free agency in the season that we just completed for $24 million. But as I talked about, that number in subsequent years is going to jump another $5 million next season to 29, then go to 32, 36, and then a player option at 40. Which, if over the 8 years of this playthrough, if we had been able to move from the $114 million budget that we started with, better than 154, so we've gone up by $40 million over these 8 seasons, so we're moving up about $5 million a year. If we had gotten that number up another $20 or $30 million, we could probably keep Isaiah Hill, but my thought is that at $29 million, in the fact that he does seem to, while still an exceptional player, be a bit on the decline with 2 straight years of a declining WAR, and the fact that he's now 30, we're not going to extract much, if any, excess value from that $29 million. Clearly, it's going to leave a huge hole in the middle of our lineup to move on from him. But with a team like Pittsburgh, you do sometimes, particularly if you haven't been able to expand your budget incredibly, as I have not been able to, you do sometimes kind of have to start that churning of the highest quality players when they start making tons of money to replenish. Fortunately, we do have a pretty good farm system. Although supposedly we're ranked 16th now. Hadn't checked it since the end of the season. Last I looked, we were 4th or 5th. But 2 pretty big-time prospects with Julio Castillo. Hit 277 in Double-A this year. 25 homers combined between high A ball and Double-A. Certainly looks like a bat who could help us in the not-so-distant future. And then starting pitcher Alex Arroyo, 13-5 with a 2.88 ERA in Double-A this past year, mostly as a 22-year-old. Did turn 23 right at the end of the year. He's going to be in Triple-A next year also. So those guys are close to being able to help us. So we do have some help on the way. But at this point, given the financial situation that we're in, it's going to be time to move on from Isaiah Hill. Was the type of player that I would love to have as part of the franchise for the entire playthrough. Would love to see him 15 years from now going into the Hall of Fame as a Pittsburgh Pirate. He very well still may be. It's going to be probably pretty unlikely at the age of 30 that he has 7 seasons with another team as good as the run that he had in Pittsburgh. But absolutely the type of player that is going to hurt like heck to have to move on from. But as I said, we've been a playoff team here in Pittsburgh 6 of 8 years and 6 of 7 years with Isaiah Hill on the team. And we've never moved past the National League Championship Series. And we've only gotten that far once. So if our goal is to win it all, we've had the best version of Isaiah Hill on the field. We've had the by far most economical version of Isaiah Hill that we'll ever have. And we still haven't gotten the job done. So we are going to try to reload and hopefully keep the rest of our team intact by offloading that salary. And you can see there are a ton of pretty big-time players that we can get straight up for Isaiah Hill. A lot of them are relievers who I don't think are going to be ultimately what we're looking for him. But there's a lot of options out there. I certainly don't think we're getting fair value for a player with his ability. But if we can get someone who is younger and someone who is much more economical, I think that's the best that we can hope. And the direction we are going to go is Juan Castillo, who was actually right on the top of the list of offers matching our team needs. 25-year-old shortstop from the Dodgers, has been in the majors each of the last 2 years. Pretty solid defensively. He is not as good defensively as our current shortstop, Tony Cota. But Castillo is a player who has still got an opportunity to improve a bit, at least according to our scout, in terms of his contact, his eye, avoiding strikeouts. And he's coming off a year where, although he hit only 241, did have 30 doubles, 16 homers, and a 1.8 WAR. And this is a guy who, a year and a half ago, was making the jump from high A ball to the major leagues. He's a former #1 draft pick. I think there is reason to think that he is going to get better. And he's also, with just 2 years of experience, making the major league minimum next year. So bringing him on board for Mr. Hill gives us a $28 million plus positive delta in terms of our payroll. And if we do decide to move on from Tony Cota at shortstop, who's arbitration eligible, then it's going to help us even more financially. The 70 infield range is more than acceptable for a shortstop. Obviously, it's very good. It's not probably Gold Glove quality, but it's very good. The error, arm, turn, double play are all kind of closer to the minimum that I'd really like for a shortstop, but I'd say that the range and the error are the two most important ratings for a shortstop in most cases, most defensive positions, quite honestly. And he's pretty strong in those. He is a player who, in a perfect world, we could look to switch to second base or third base, but we are controlling the Pirates. We're not living in a perfect world. So my thought is, if we move him in for Cota, we're going to be losing a fair bit defensively. Cota is better at error, arm, and turning double play by significant amounts in some cases, although their range is similar. But Coda's coming off a year where he hit 209. He's going to be 30 years old by the start of next season, and he put up a 0.8 WAR this past year, so a run less than we'd potentially be picking up. Now, he is durable, and I love the fact that he goes out there and gives us, and has given us, good defense for 150 games every year. But he's going to be looking for close to $5.5 million in arbitration this coming season. So he's also getting pretty expensive for a guy who just can't hit. But there is a thought to potentially keep Cota around and play short. The issue is that Bobby Guzman, who we brought on about a year ago to become our second baseman, is a solid defensive second baseman who had a respectable bat for us this year, 82 OPS plus, 74 WRC plus. But he at least, as you can see here, has hit over 260 each of the last 3 years in the majors. Doesn't walk a ton, but he is definitely a more productive offensive player than Cota, who put up a 51 OPS plus and a 45 WRC plus. And then third baseman Willie Medrano, who we also brought on last year at the beginning of the offseason. Solid defensive player with a solid bat. Hit 235 with 21 homers for us. Down year for him in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus, but is still at least a not total black hole in terms of the lineup, which is kind of what Tony Cota seems to be trending towards. So my thought is that we weaken our defense a little bit by moving Cota out of the starting lineup. But if we come back next year with Guzman at second Medrano at third, hopefully a healthy Luis Flores at first. Guys like David Green, Juan Rivera, Ethan Fox as utility infielders. And then we are able to make the addition of Castillo at shortstop. We've still got overall very good infield defense, although it's not as good as it was last year if we're moving on from Coda. But we've got, at most positions, guys who can at least put up a respectable effort at the plate. And we're going to need a little more offense if we're moving on from Isaiah Hill. Looking at what the OSA thinks, they too also think he can prove a little bit in his contact, his eye, and his avoiding strikeouts. So there is some consistency there. Hopefully with our coaching staff, he'll notch up a little better in terms of his contact and his gap power. He doesn't have exceptional speed, but certainly seems like a guy who should hit 35 doubles, maybe 5-7 triples when all is said and done. And if we get, 15 to 20 kind of average home run power out of him, or maybe even if it's 12 to 18 home runs, if he can get that batting average up just to above 250, into the 260 range, which is not impossible with a 60 contact in the average speed that he'll have. I think with that glove, he could be a pretty useful and economic player for us. And in my view, he's the best option out there. So clearly not fair value in terms of moving on from one of the iconic players in baseball over the last 7 years. But at this point, with where we are with Pittsburgh's budget, I think it's a decision we have to make. And if we trade Hill to the Dodgers, we're able to get Castillo back as well as $2.3 million in cash, which certainly helps us. So we are going to go ahead and move on from Isaiah Hill. Thank him for 7 exceptional years in Pittsburgh. And Juan Castillo is now a member of our team. Certainly we are going to take a big hit to fan interest. We knew that we'd be doing that. Probably going to offset a big chunk of the boost that we got from the recent starting of the charity that we talked about. So we'll see how bad it looks. Obviously, the fans shouldn't be shocked. They know that this team has at this point been run by Bob Nutting for decades. And they also know the amount of money Isaiah Hill was going to make. Castillo, at least, is also a popular player, so he gives us a little bit back in terms of fan interest, but only a 4-point hit net, so not as bad as it could have been. So we went from 76 to 72, so for losing a marquee player like Hill, that could be a lot worse. You can see that opens up a ton of money for free agents, but realistically, for the near term, we're going to at least put a good chunk of it back into our scouting and development budgets. Hopefully we will be able to get those higher before the end of the season, but we now at least have, or before the beginning of next season, we want those to still be higher, but at least we've got a little financial flexibility now to play around with things. We have made arbitration offers to a number of players, most notably Luis Longoria. We are going to bring back our fragile ace, or at least try to. He was looking for about $12.5 million. I think we ended up making an offer right around 12 to him. He is a player who, despite being fragile, by putting him on a pitch count and also having an aggressive tiredness hook with him, we've been able to get, as you can see, 32 or 33 starts out of him each of the past 3 years, 170 to 180 innings, 240 plus strikeouts each year. And we've got to just try to nurse him through another season. Next year, or the season after next more accurately, he may be too expensive for us to keep in his final arbitration eligible season. But at around $12 million, if he's healthy, there still is a pretty good chance, in my estimation, that we will get surplus value out of him. And there is a chance, when you look at his pitching profile with 3 fantastic pitches, stuff that's off the charts, movement that is excellent. Admittedly, not great control, but you look at his profile, there is a chance that he can turn in a season where he goes 18-5 with a 2.40 ERA and 250 or 260 strikeouts over 180 innings. I mean, that's the ceiling for him, but he's got a Cy Young caliber type ceiling. He's only going to be 28 this coming year. So he is the most expensive of our many arbitration eligible players that we are going to be trying to bring back. You can see we haven't made offers to everybody yet because some of these players are willing to at least talk multiple year extensions with us, which we have to figure out. We had thought we might have to move on from closer Ricky Rios, whose arbitration estimate is a little over $8 million, which certainly is going to be expensive for a reliever for a team like the Pirates. But he is coming off a year when he led the National League in games pitched and saves with 105 strikeouts and a 2.56 ERA, as well as 10 wins. Probably going to be a pretty strong candidate for reliever of the year in the National League, which would give us 2 in a row since Greg Gaylord won it last year. So I think that we're going to try to bring Rios back. And then when we're looking at Flores, Guzman, Gonzalez, is there an opportunity to make a longer-term offer to one or multiple of those players now that we have kind of fixed up a little bit our financial situation? Because when we look at salaries now with the big contract into the out years for Mr. Hill now off the books, you can see we do peak at $109 million theoretically the season after next, but some of those out years are lower at this point because we don't have a lot of long-term obligations. So there is potential to maybe structure a contract that will allow us to sign one of those other players to a longer-term extension. So that's what we're going to kind of think about and focus on right now. And Luis Flores, our excellent young first baseman who we had picked up as a Rule 5 pick from Atlanta at this point 4 seasons ago, as you can see, is willing to do a long-term deal with us for over $12 million a year. This is one that I don't think I'm going to pursue. He has been a very productive offensive player at the major league level with a 129 OPS plus, 126 WRC plus over 4 seasons in the majors. He's got a great personality in the clubhouse, good speed, good bunter, brings everything to the table except he's fragile, and that has definitely manifested itself in his performance. As you can see, he's never even played 80 games in a season, despite being on our team for 4 full years at this point. So being a team like Pittsburgh, as much as we love his bat and we would love to see what he could do over 500 to 600 at-bats instead of the 250 to 300 bats he's historically gotten over the course of his career, a 300 batting average with a close to 300 batting average with a little bit of pop in his bat, some speed on the base paths, as we've talked about, is a useful player. But I don't think that making a long-term commitment to him at this point is the right decision. So his arbitration numbers around $6 million. We'll try to bring him in for a little less than that for 1 more year at this point. And we already talked about Bobby Guzman in this episode. Like him defensively at second. Would love a higher error rating in a perfect world and a higher double play rating in a perfect world, but he's certainly more than an acceptable defensive second baseman. Question is how much he's going to hit. And he's looking for close to $11 million over 7 seasons. I think that's a little high for us to go with on him also, given that he's a little bit above average defensively. And best case scenario is maybe he gets a couple years where he's an average-ish, a little better average offensive player like he did have in 2044 with Miami. But I don't feel like making a long-term commitment to him quite yet, because I don't know that the number that he's looking for is going to go up significantly from the 11 million-ish he's looking for right now. If Flores is healthy and Flores goes out and hits 320 with 20 home runs and 15 stolen bases, which is probably the best we could hope for from him, but certainly not unrealistic if he plays a full year and is healthy and productive, the number he's looking for could definitely go up. I don't think the number Guzman's looking for annually is going to go up that much, but I also don't think he's as good a player as Flores, so I'm just not willing to make that longer-term commitment quite yet. Which leaves us with an option to potentially do something with Henry Gonzalez, who was the number 1 overall pick our first year running this team. He's now been in the majors 3 years, 2-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, and also was a wild card MVP during his rookie season. Has not developed offensively as well as we would have hoped. You can see his home run production has actually regressed over his 3 years in the majors. His batting average has always kind of been in that 260, 270 kind of range. The real positive thing about him is he's got a great eye, though. You can see he's averaged over 100 walks a season, so his on-base percentage for his career is still close to 400, and that helps him be a pretty productive offensive player, although his WAR this past season was the lowest of his career. He is an extremely popular player locally, so being able to lock him up for the long term would be useful. He's DH'd a lot the last few years, but will be taking over as left field for the departed Isaiah Hill. That's probably the best spot to play him defensively. See what he's looking for. And I mean, it's $16 million a year, so it's not cheap. But it's also not a contract that would be crippling at those kind of numbers. I think I'm actually still just going to bring him back for 1 year at this point. This is his first arbitration eligible year. We'll see what he can do. As I've said, I like the eye. I really like the eye. I like the fact that he doesn't strike out a ton. But I don't think he's ultimately going to be more than a 20 to 25 home run type of guy. And, looking at his contact, his gap power, and speed, 280 average with 35 doubles, 25 home runs is probably as good as we can expect in those numbers. Now, he is going to add 120 walks on that and have an on-base percentage well over 400 in his big season, so he's got value. But I don't feel like he's a player who's all of a sudden going to be looking for $25 or $30 million a year if we wait and take a look at another card with him. So I will offer him a longer term extension, but it's not going to be at close to $16 million a year. I have a feeling it's not going to be a number that really gets him very interested. But we will take a shot at locking him up for some of his free agent years. But probably not quite at the number that he's going to be looking for. And we've got an offer that we're going to make to Gonzalez that will probably not have him very happy at all. As I talked about, he's looking for about 15.75 million a year. We're only offering him 12.2. We are giving him the 9 years that he's looking for, but he had wanted an opt-out after the 4th season, which is the end of his arbitration period. No way that we're going to give him that. And, the numbers are lower until the final year, which we've switched to a team option from a player option. So it's a much less lucrative contract. I can't imagine he's going to go for this, but if we could lock him up at these kind of numbers for his 4 arbitration seasons that he's going to have with us, as well as 5 free agency years, would be happy to do that. Again, I don't think there's any way he will. Yeah, and he's looking for a shorter deal now, but a number closer to that 15. We may try to come back at him once with a more realistic number from our end, but I tend to think we're just going to end up making him an arbitration offer for this upcoming season. As I mentioned, he's got 2 years, 146 days of service time. We did manipulate his service time so that we've got 4 arbitration eligible seasons still ahead. So we basically control him through his 20s at this point. So we don't have to reach in terms of a contract. It would be nice to have a little certainty, particularly if he does get more productive and we're able to get these arbitration years bought out now at a more reasonable figure than they might become. But I tend to think we're probably not going to get quite to the number that he's looking for. All right, and we're trying to meet him a little bit in the middle. He's looking for $15.2 million, which has come down a little. We were at $12.2, so we're going up to $13.5 in the average annual value. We still are not giving him the opt-out after the arbitration years, but we did keep in the player option he wanted for the last year of the contract. We're coming back with 8 years. We and him were originally at 9. He just came back in 6. We're trying to put it back up to 8. I don't think he'll go for this. And if he doesn't, then we're just going to look to get him locked up for next year, avoid going to arbitration, and then maybe we'll continue these discussions a year from now. Yeah, he's not willing to think about it, although his average number is down to $14.2 million. So we're getting closer in terms of the average annual amount. The issue is, though, you look at these 4 arbitration years, and he's looking for 6, 10, 13, and 17 at this point to let us buy out 2 years of free agency at close to $19 million. When we look at what he's expected to make in arbitration at this point in his career, the numbers are just 4.5, 5, 7.5, 9.4. So we are way overpaying in his arbitration years right now compared to what he's expected to get just 2 years of free agency. And honestly, close to $20 million for a player like Gonzalez is going to be pretty close to fair market value, I would think, even if he does hit free agency. So I just don't see that we're getting a ton of benefit from what he's looking for from us right now. And so from that perspective, I think we gave it a shot. His arbitration estimate is $4.5 million, so we are just going to try to get him signed for next year. We'll offer him $4.25 million. Hopefully that will be enough to get it done. Not quite. So he's going to be, and he's not happy at all at this point with us since we've gone back and forth so much. So I would prefer to just get him signed since he is a popular player. So we're actually offering him a little more, 4.6. And he's willing to think about it. We'll see what he comes back with. So that means that we've got arbitration offers out to just about everybody except Tony Cota. And we've got to decide what to do with him. Formerly our starting shortstop, now likely a super utility infielder with an incredible glove and a very mediocre bat for us, but certainly a player who has some value. Question is, do we want to be paying him, $5.25 million a year next year? And I think the answer to that is no. And I acknowledge that we are, actually I should, just for purposes of playing around, put Castillo back on, or not back, but onto the major league lineup and see what Jan Vasquez suggests that we do. And he still suggests playing Tony Cota as short. He's very defense focused. he wants Castillo to be a DH for us. Yeah, I disagree with him on that. I like Castillo's youth. I like Castillo's bat. I get the fact that he's fallen in love with Coda's glove because Coda's glove is excellent. But similar to the story with Isaiah Hill, having that excellent glove in the middle of our infield hasn't allowed us to do much of anything in terms of winning a National League pennant, or even better, winning a World Series title. Taking a look at salaries for this coming year, we can potentially be coming in at around $86 million, and it'll be a little lower than that if we bring Coda back, because some of these guys we're going to be able to get for a little bit under their arbitration estimates. I do love the optionality that it would give us. I just think it might not be the best place to spend our money. If we're going to have Flores back at first, Guzman at second, Castillo at short, Medrano at third, as I talked about earlier, that still lets us have the versatile rookie David Green back as a utility infielder who can play a lot of positions for us, hopefully hit 280. We've got Juan Rivera back as a utility infielder who can play a lot of positions competently. We've got Ethan Fox back as a potential utility infielder. Certainly the glove of Coda is something special. And we do also have Tony Rendon back as a potential utility infielder, but I think he's a guy who's probably going to be squeezed out in terms of numbers for next season. And he also doesn't have any minor league options left, so he is less certain to be back with us than some of those other players that I mentioned. Coda is an exceptional insurance policy for us and does ensure, at least as a defensive substitute, that he would probably be able to play pretty frequently for us, sometimes backing up Castillo, sometimes as a defensive substitute for a Guzman, Medrano, or Castillo. He would have some value. He's only well known, so he's not going to move the needle as far as fan interest if we bring him back. I think we're going to just shop him right now and just see what, if anything, we can possibly get for him. I'm guessing we're going to be somewhat underwhelmed with what the demand for him is in terms of a trade and the quality of what we can get back. Probably a lot of mediocre-ish relievers, but we'll take a look at it. I haven't kind of looked through what's out there for Coda. I'm not all that impressed. And there is kind of one other option. I like Bobby Guzman because he's a little younger. But if we really want to focus on defense, there is the option to keep Coda at shortstop and then move Castillo to second base. He's never played the position, but I don't think with those ratings there's any reason to believe that he can't play it productively. And we could potentially in spring training move Castillo to second base and then turn Guzman into our utility infielder for next year. I don't think that having Guzman, Medrano, Castillo, and Coda, having all four of those contracts on the books for the long term is going to work for the Pirates. But with the fact that we have moved on from Mr. Hill, you look at Coda and he's a free agent after this year anyways, so that kind of solves the problem. But Guzman, the season after next, could be $8.5 million. Medrano could be around $8.5 million. And then even at that point, Castillo could be looking at $4 million-ish in 2037. But for next year, I think I'm talking myself into bringing Coda back in feeling like we've got four very competent defensive players that can play at second, third, and short for us. And with Guzman, Medrano, and Castillo feeling that at least three of them can be respectable or better offensively. As I said, I think Castillo's going to be in the lineup after we traded for him. The question is whether we help our offense and weaken our defense by playing him over Coda at shortstop, or do we play him over Guzman, where I think we also help our offense and defense, but we don't help our offense as much by swapping Guzman out of the lineup, but we do get better second base defense and we keep the excellent shortstop defense. So I think bringing Coda back just gives us more optionality, and it is something that we can afford for next season. So we'll offer him $5.25 million for next year. And obviously, as we get closer to the season, if we look at our roster, I don't think that any of these contracts are not tradable. So we're not making a long-term commitment by any stretch of the imagination. At most, it's a one-year commitment to Guzman, Medrano, and Coda at this point, and we could clearly look to move on from any of them if we decide that's the right thing to do when we get closer to the beginning of next season. And we've also made offers to a number of our minor league free agents. Not going to bore you with all of the details on there, but it's obviously a long list of them. Jaquan Hinton, who we brought on for a second brief tenure with the team, is a guy who we picked up at the trade deadline in 2042, and then at the trade deadline again in 2045. You can see he's hit 239 for us in those two stints with 12 homers and 243 at-bats. He's looking for about $8 million a year for 3 years, so he is not in the mix to bring back at this point. The hope is that Flores is healthier next year and that having the youngster Green up on the roster along with Ethan Fox, we've got enough guys who can play first base in a pinch. We did want to bring back the veteran center fielder Ramon Herrera. Unfortunately, he still wants to be a starter, so we made offers to him, and he's no longer even interested in talking with us at this point. Wanted him back because he is got nice range for a center fielder, left-handed bat, which it seems like we're always in need of, especially coming off the bench. So would have liked to bring him back. Still may be an opportunity, but certainly not one that appears to be right out in front of us. So we're going to start seeing what happens with all of these players that we've made arbitration offers to. Hopefully we can avoid hearings with any of them. And would think that signing some of those players is going to give us a nice boost in fan interest over the next couple of weeks. So given that we've already moved on from Mr. Hill and we're still at a 72 in fan interest, we do have the potential to be going into this upcoming 2046 season with potentially the opportunity to sell more tickets than we ever have at higher prices than we ever have with the Pirates. And Major League Awards season is going to be starting up soon. Felix Bath, who is another, I wouldn't call him a young pitcher at this point because he's almost 27 years old. A guy who we picked up in a trade with the Mets about 3.5 years ago. 18-7 with a 3.37 ERA, top pitcher in the IL. To me, he profiles as a fifth starter, seventh or eighth guy out of the bullpen at the major league level. But he does still have one option year left, so certainly a guy who we are going to keep on the 40-man roster in case we have some injury issues or ineffectiveness with our pitchers next season. And we've started to sign some of those minor league free agents. Importantly, we also did bring back closer Ricky Rios, a guy who we probably would not have been able to fit in now that he's heading to arbitration years, and he's coming off a year when he led the NL in saves. But 7.875 million, certainly at the high end of what the Pirates can afford, but the fans are happy to have him on board. And moving on from Hill did allow us to bring Rios back as our closer, which hopefully will help ensure that our bullpen will remain the best or one of the best in baseball. Guzman back, Rivera back as a utility infielder, Ethan Mingo back in the bullpen, fans pleased with him. Henry Gonzalez signed that one-year deal after we couldn't get a long-termer signed. Fans happy with that. Luis Flores back. Fans happy with that. Catcher Mario Quiroz. Shortstop Coda. We'll see what we end up doing with him. More minor leaguers who also signed. Willie Madrano back. The fans pleased with that. Danny Robles back, left-handed reliever, fans pleased with that, and catcher Nelson Ibarra and relief pitcher Mike Wright back. So we still have to wait to hear from just the real big arbitration-eligible player, Luis Longoria. But we've got everybody else signed, and we got 10 more points of fan interest out of it. So that was good. We could be in the best situation with the potential financials of this team that we've ever been as the new season begins. Finally starting to get some benefit from stringing together the winning seasons. A lot of our homegrown players who are arbitration eligible, as you've seen, are now somewhat popular and giving us a boost in fan interest when we signed them to the one-year deals. And then we did get the bump in loyalty and fan interest from the recent charity that we started. So I think there is an opportunity for us to make this upcoming season even more lucrative. So we're actually going to tentatively bump the ticket price up another $1 and see what that looks like when we get to the winter meetings, in terms of hopefully still selling more season tickets than we did a year ago, driving more attendance, and most importantly, generating more revenue per game. But the reason I'm kind of confident doing that is because, as we've talked about, we don't have a lot of free agents that we're going to be losing this year. Jaquan Hinton doesn't have a ton of popularity, hasn't been with us that long, shouldn't be a big hit. And Ramon Herrera, also not that popular. So it's not like we've got a player that's going to be leaving us that's going to cause a huge hit to fan interest. So I feel like we're in a pretty good situation to hopefully maintain a pretty sound number next season, particularly if we can get this team off to a good start and winning games in March and April, which has in recent seasons sometimes been an issue for us. And Luis Longoria also back. The fans ecstatic to have him back on board. We'll see what ecstatic means. Another 5 points of fan interest. So that's pretty positive. Again, this is the best we've ever had fan interest with Pittsburgh, and it doesn't feel like it's a number that's going to totally collapse as we get into the offseason, given that we're not going to be losing much in the way of popular players or many in the way of players, period, when we get into free agency in a couple of weeks. And we've simmed ahead far enough to be the NL Gold Glove winners, and maybe I'll feel better about that potential decision to bring Coda back if he finally won a NL Gold Glove award at shortstop. I'm trying to figure out who else we would have that would be a contender, and he certainly seems like he could be front and center, maybe Arellano in center field. Let's find out. Second baseman, Bobby Guzman, so the new addition to the team. Again, he didn't hit quite as well as we would have expected last year, but good to see finally some Gold Glove recognition for the Pirates. I feel like we've been a pretty pitching and defense-focused team for most of this playthrough, and honestly, we haven't won very many Gold Glove awards at all. Had, I guess, mostly very good but not excellent defensive players at a lot of the positions over the years. And the reliever of the year was announced today, since I didn't get a personalized email on that. Obviously, Ricky Rios did not win it, so we don't get to go back to back with that award. Let's see who ended up winning it in the National League and how close Rios, with his 10 wins and 44 saves, was to getting that recognition from the sports writers and broadcasters and the other voters. Rios did finish second, got 2 first-place votes, but Bill Gonzalez of the Mets, who had some important games against us in the playoffs, 7-2 record, 38 saves, so not quite as many wins and saves as Rios, but his ERA of 1.97 was about half a run better, put up a 3.2 WAR. So certainly a very strong candidate, more than half a run better with that ERA, 3.1 WAR for Rios. Would have thought that it was a closer vote than it ended up being, but not going to lose a lot of sleep over this one. Silver Sluggers announced for the year, and Isaiah Hill did get his 5th in 7 seasons. He's no longer with us, as you know. He's with the Dodgers, but one final piece of hardware for Mr. Hill in his Pittsburgh Pirates career, a 5th Silver Slugger award in his 7 years in the majors. And doesn't look like there's any other big awards for the Pirates. Not surprisingly this season. Rookie of the Year, only 3 players got votes. None of them were ours. American League Rookie of the Year, also a split vote between Arturo Veracruz and Jeremy Freak. Bobby Crosby still winning Manager of the Year awards with the Royals. That is interesting to see. He was our bench coach back in the early days of our playthrough. We promoted him to manager in 2034, so he won the 3 consecutive World Series we had with that team in 34, 35, and 36. And he's added 2 more since we left, or 2 more Manager of the Year awards since we left. Only 1 more World Series since we left a couple seasons ago, but good to see him continuing to put together a Hall of Fame type career as a manager after he came up through the Kansas City system with us. AL Cy Young Award winner, one of the top pitchers in the history of this playthrough, Rogelio Loera of the Yankees. You can see he has a boatload of Cy Young Awards, just won another one at the age of 33, 19-2 with a 1.83 ERA, 388 strikeouts for the Yankees. Yeah, that's the type of season that will get you a Cy Young Award, no doubt. Here in the National League, Cesar Soto. Our guy, Bobby Gonzalez, finished 4th in the voting, 17-12 with a 3.07 ERA. And Luis Longoria also got a few votes, finished. Actually, Gonzalez was 3rd in the voting. Longoria finished 8th in the voting, the fewest votes of anyone who got votes, but 14-8 record, 3.44 ERA. So it'll be good to have both of those guys back next year. American League MVP Gilberto Romero of the Royals edged out Loera, who had the opportunity, was not too far away from one of those rare MVP/Cy Young Award seasons. But Romero, the second baseman for the Royals, was an international free agent signing of ours back in 2034 when we were GM of the Royals. Really nice year, 305 average, 43 homers, 122 ribbies, league best slugging percentage, and WAR over in the American League. In the National League, Jorge Aguilera is the center fielder from the Phillies. Unanimous MVP, 330 batting average, 43 homers, 120 ribbies. Was the 2nd overall pick just 3.5 years ago. So a quick trip to the majors from Aguilera out of the University of Oregon. Looks like he is going to be a good one, coming off a year with a 10.5 WAR. Looking through the votes, former Pirate Isaiah Hill, the only member of our team who got any MVP votes this past season. So with award season complete, we are going to head to arbitration. Obviously, we don't have anyone who's arbitration eligible. Tried to make another offer to Herrera. He still doesn't want to talk to us, so he's probably going to hit the open market. Don't know whether or not we'd be able to bring him back. Feel like we've got the roster almost settled for next year. You know, we could probably look to pick up an outfielder in free agency. If there was a big-time catcher, would love to do that. And always intrigued by the opportunity to add a pitcher. But I don't think we really have a ton of moves that we need to make. We've got a team that's been a consistent performer in the playoffs, and obviously we've got a big hole moving on from Isaiah Hill. But I do kind of feel with the prospects that we've brought up in our system, with Arellano in center, it'll ultimately be Gonzalez in left and Ruacho in right, I think. Joel Fields as a potential fourth outfielder has spent a big chunk of each of the last 2 years in AAA. 24-year-old who was our number one pick back in 2043. He's probably ready at this point to be a backup outfielder for us. Certainly losing Herrera gives us a little bit of a hole as a backup center fielder, although Ruacho could play center in a pinch if we needed to. And he is the guy that we played there this past year when Arellano was banged up. But kind of like the versatility of our infield at this point, and probably have a few excess players on the team. So maybe we add an outfielder, particularly one who can play center field. If we can upgrade from Nelson Ibarra and Mario Quiroz. And I have a feeling that Chris Rodriguez will be on the Major League roster next year as a catcher, so we may need to upgrade from both of those guys potentially. But if there's a catcher out there, we'll certainly look at a catcher. We'll look at outfield. And I like our pitching staff, but always interested in adding another big-time arm. So we're not going to have a ton of money to spend in free agency. We'll see what the numbers actually look like. And again, we want to add a little more back into scouting and development ultimately. So we're not even going to have as much as it looks to spend when we get to free agency. But if there's a interesting player out there or a trade to be had that we think will make us better for the upcoming season, we'll definitely look to execute on it. And we've made it to the start of free agency. Some international free agents hitting the markets. Take a quick look. Starting pitcher Danny Falcone. Not a horrible player, but kind of replacement level. And we've got a lot of good young starters in our system, so I don't feel like we need to chase after him. Marco Padilla here. Again, kind of a replacement level-ish player, looking for about $3 million. Not all that exciting. So not surprisingly, doesn't look like there's going to be. Third baseman Alex Gonzalez, interesting player, looking for $19 million a year. Pass. So not too much there. Looking at the big free agents on the open market. Some names that we do know from playing the sim. Bill Davey, a starting pitcher with a torn UCL, probably not someone to chase after. Young Juan Pai, starter from the Phillies. Looks like he's struggled to be real effective in the majors. Jason Williams, another starting pitcher. Danny McKinney, another starter. Rod Rivera, second baseman. Decent fielder. Got some pop in his bat, looking for $22 million. Certainly not a player that we would chase after. Another starter in Xavier Rhodes, coming off a great year for the Yankees. 18-7, 2.61 ERA. Going to be looking for about $22 million, so not a guy that we could get involved in. Another starter, lefty Juan Vargas. Maybe he's more reasonable. Not really. A little bit less expensive, but $21 million a year. Not the type of area that we would play. Avery Lazenby, third baseman with some pop in the bat, also looking for pretty big money. Xavier Francis, second baseman, guessing he's going to be looking for pretty big money also. $19 million, wrecked physically. And then Manny Collazo, a familiar name to us, former Pirate, looking for big money. He was a closer for us, as you can see, not too long ago. Eventually got priced out of the market for us, but would love to have that left-handed arm back in our bullpen, but unlikely that we will be able to afford it, unfortunately. So taking a look more broadly at the market, Collazo highlights the pitchers that are out there. Alex Castro is a player who doesn't look like he's looking for a ton of money. Pretty respectable right-handed reliever, little bit of popularity. He's an Iron Man, good personality, extreme ground ball pitcher to take advantage of hopefully our good infield defense. He would be a guy that we'd consider going after, but he's a back of the arm type pitcher for our bullpen at this point. Mentioned that catcher was an area we might want to focus on. Not really much of anything all that exciting out there. I guess Jaden Hofer seems to be decent ability, decent hitter, but don't see him being a huge upgrade on what we've got, so I don't think there's a lot to do there. Mentioned that outfield was the other position we might be interested in looking for a fourth or fifth outfielder. Center fielder is a need for us, or backup center fielder is a need, but certainly not going to be spending $22 million on Marco Riviera, despite the fact that he is a very interesting looking player in terms of his profile, but he's also 36 years old and wrecked physically. Jesus Barreto, I think a player that we've looked at in the past. I can't remember, was he ever actually on the Pirates at the major league level? He has not been, no. He is a guy that I know that we've looked at from time to time. Nice glove, fan favorite. Would not be a bad fourth outfielder for us. I don't know that that's what he's going to be looking for. But certainly with that glove and an acceptable bat, he would not be the worst player to bring around. Arellano, not really a center fielder, so probably don't want to go there. Where's our old buddy Ramon Herrera? Looking for $1.9 million. Wonder if he's even willing to talk to us anymore. Yeah, he is willing to talk to us, looking for more money than he was looking for. So there are definitely guys to consider adding. Kai-Shek Chiang is a guy who's had some pretty productive seasons at the major league level. Not quite the hitter that he used to be anymore. Honestly, I'm a little intrigued by Jesus Barreto. Is a fourth outfielder. He's a guy who actually he hasn't played in the majors in a while, though, at this point. How long has it been? 2042, so it would be 4 years since he was in the majors, and he hit just .215 with 14 homers. Again, is a fourth outfielder with the good personality and the good defense. I think there's worse options out there, particularly if he's only looking for a one-year deal, which he is. I think we can probably compete with the Honey Hunters on money if we decide we want to bring him on board. So there are a few players to look at. Obviously, we'll take a look at maybe making a trade also, but doesn't seem like there's anyone who's going to revolutionize the team for us and the lineup and the roster for us that we can actually afford. Riviera out there among the batters is kind of the only guy who's more than a three-star kind of player, and you can see even the kind of three-star guys who might be able to help us a little bit that are out there are all looking for pretty good money and are definitely getting towards the older side. There's definitely options to think about, but no one that's jumping off the page to me right now, that's for sure. But we will focus on free agency and our decisions on that front in our next episode. Right now, fan interest is as good as it's ever been. Fan loyalty at the poor level, sadly, is as good as it's ever been for this Pirates team during our playthrough. And we do potentially have some money to spend on free agents, although, as I've talked about, we do want to boost those scouting and development budgets ultimately up a bit. But feeling cautiously optimistic that the team finances for this upcoming season are going to be in good shape with that real strong fan interest. Hopefully we can really start generating more revenue per game and get the budget up another notch. The big question, obviously, though, is how we're going to perform on the field as we move on from Isaiah Hill. And we won't find that out in the next episode because we'll still be in the off season. But that will be a big question for these Pirates to answer when we get to next year. We've been investing a lot in player development basically our entire time through this playthrough. We've got a respectable, according to the pundits, minor league system. I think it probably is better than that when all is said and done. We've got guys on the way who can definitely help us, and it's going to be time for those big investments in scouting and development that we've been making over the past 8 seasons to start paying some dividends, given that we moved on from Tony Santana a year ago. We're moving on from Isaiah Hill in this upcoming season, and we're potentially going to need to be moving on from Luis Longoria in the not-so-distant future. So we're going to be reliant on that farm system really providing us some players who we can plug right in if we're going to keep this pretty successful streak of 6 playoff appearances in the last 7 years going with these Pirates. And hopefully at some point be able to get this team to the World Series and win a World Series, because that is still the ultimate goal. And we'll talk about what we're going to do in terms of free agency to try to achieve that goal in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.